My brother accidentally sent me a voice note, and I couldn't believe what I heard. It wasn't meant for me, but every word cut deeper than anything before. My parents had always treated me like I was invisible, like nothing I did mattered, but hearing their words so plainly spoken made it real. I felt a mix of anger and sadness I couldn't shake. I sat there, phone in hand, listening again and again, trying to make sense of it. My younger brother, Jake, hadn't meant to send it, and I could hear the nervousness in his voice as he spoke, but that didn't make what they said any easier to hear. It was like all the years of being ignored, criticized, and looked down upon suddenly came crashing in at once. I realized how unfair everything had been. Jake had always been their favorite. He could do little, and they would praise him endlessly. Meanwhile, I was constantly reminded that I was failing, that I wasn't good enough. I remembered birthdays they barely acknowledged, achievements they dismissed, and the countless times I stayed quiet while they praised Jake in front of everyone. That voice note was just another confirmation that their favoritism wasn't subtle, it was deliberate. Something inside me shifted that night. I couldn't keep living under their judgment or letting their opinions define me. I decided I needed to take control of my life, to prove that I could succeed on my own terms. It wasn't just about money or career, it was about reclaiming my self-worth and showing them that their words had no power over me anymore. Even though I felt betrayed and hurt, I also knew I had to be smart about what I did next. I couldn't let them see me break, I had to plan carefully, take steps that would give me the life I deserved without letting them stop me. I started thinking about what I wanted, how I could achieve it, and how one day they would see me, not as worthless, but as someone who had taken control of their life and never looked back. The anger I felt turned into determination, and I knew this was only the beginning. Listening to that voice note again, I realized just how deep the betrayal ran. Jake had been complaining to our parents, saying I was wasting the family's money and opportunities, words that stung more because they were true in their eyes. I remembered all the times my parents had made me feel small, telling me I wasn't ambitious enough or smart enough to make anything of myself. Every dinner, every casual comment had been a reminder that I didn't measure up. The voice note was the final proof that their disdain wasn't hidden, they openly criticized me behind my back, and even my own brother had echoed their judgment without thinking of the consequences. I couldn't help replaying memories of my childhood, the small humiliations that had piled up over the years. I remembered being blamed for mistakes I hadn't made, being compared to Jake at every turn, and being told I'd never amount to anything. Those flashbacks made my chest tighten. I had tried to prove myself over and over, but no matter what I did, it was never enough. Now it was clear, they didn't see me as their child with potential, they saw me as a burden, someone to be corrected and criticized endlessly. Something inside me snapped. I realized that living for their approval had only caused me pain. I couldn't let their words control my life anymore. I needed to step away from their expectations and start making decisions for myself. I started imagining a life where I didn't need them to validate me, where I could succeed without their praise or acknowledgement. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I had to be careful, thoughtful, and deliberate in how I built my future. Every plan, every small action, had to move me closer to independence and away from their influence. I felt a mix of fear and excitement, fear of failing on my own, excitement at the thought of finally proving my worth. I was done waiting for them to notice me or to change. From now on, I would focus on my life, my goals, and my success, making sure that one day, they would see the person I had become, not through their lens, but through my own achievements. This was the moment I decided to take control. After that voice note, every day felt heavier than the last. I kept showing up, smiling, pretending everything was fine, but inside I felt small and drained. The feeling of never being enough stuck with me like a shadow. My parents didn't make it any easier, they continued to criticize, comment on every little mistake, and compare me to Jake at every opportunity. Even small achievements were ignored or dismissed. Some nights, I would lie awake replaying the voice note, wondering if I would ever escape their judgment. I took on more work than I could handle. I worked long hours at a job I barely liked, picked up side gigs, anything that could bring in extra money. On the outside, I seemed composed, even cheerful, but on the inside, I was exhausted from hiding my feelings and pretending that their words didn't hurt. I didn't want anyone, not even Jake, to see me falter. I wanted to appear strong while secretly building something for myself. Jake noticed the tension. He didn't say much, but I could tell he felt guilty about what he had said in that voice note. Sometimes he would glance at me with regret, but he was also scared of our parents, unsure of how to fix what he had done. I didn't blame him completely. I understood that he had grown up in the same environment, but his words had cut deeper than anyone else's. While keeping up appearances, I started quietly planning for the future. I researched opportunities, saved money, and looked for ways to gain independence. I wanted to create a life where I didn't have to answer to them or rely on their approval. Every small step felt like progress, even if no one noticed. I studied investments, learned new skills, and mapped out a plan to stand on my own. It was exhausting, but it also felt empowering. The pain of being belittled became fuel for change. I realized that the only way to win was to focus on myself, build my strength quietly, and make sure that one day, my life would reflect my worth, without their recognition or permission. Each day of struggle brought me closer to that goal. After months of working harder than ever, I finally got a promotion at work. It wasn't just any promotion, it was one that gave me real responsibility and recognition from people who actually valued my skills. For the first time, I felt a sense of pride that didn't depend on my parents' approval. I knew I was capable, and it felt good to see others noticing it, even if my family still treated me as if I were nothing. When I told my parents about it, they barely reacted. A nod, a quick "that's nice," and then they moved on to praise Jake for something small he had done. I realized that no matter what I achieved, they would never celebrate me. But I didn't need their approval anymore. I started keeping my successes quiet, sharing them only with people who actually cared or could help me grow. Around that time, I met Mr. Thompson, a mentor at work who took an interest in me. He didn't know my family situation, but he offered advice, guidance, and connections that could open doors I never imagined. I listened carefully, learning how to manage projects, negotiate deals, and make strategic moves. Each lesson became a tool I could use later, not just for my career but for creating leverage in the life I wanted outside my family's control. I started feeling a new kind of power. The more I learned, the more I realized I could change my situation. I didn't have to react to my parents' abuse immediately, but I could quietly plan my next steps. Every small victory at work was a reminder that I was building something bigger. Deep down, I felt a mix of satisfaction and anticipation. Satisfaction because I was proving myself outside the family's shadow, and anticipation because I knew that one day, I would have the upper hand. I was patient, gathering experience, knowledge, and connections without anyone noticing. My parents remained blind to my growth, but every day, I was quietly preparing to show them, and maybe Jake too, that I wasn't the worthless child they had always claimed I was. This promotion was only the beginning, a small step toward a much larger plan that I was ready to execute when the time was right. I knew that if I wanted to take control of my life, and maybe even make my parents feel the weight of their own cruelty, I had to become fully independent. Financial freedom was the first step. I started saving every extra dollar I could, cutting back on unnecessary expenses, and looking for smart ways to invest. I bought a small property quietly, something that could grow in value and give me a real sense of security. Every decision I made was part of a larger plan, to build a life where I didn't need anyone's approval, and where my parents' words couldn't touch me. At the same time, Jake started opening up more. He admitted that he regretted what he had said in that voice note, that he had seen how my parents favored him over me, and that it had made him feel guilty. I listened carefully, not with anger, but with awareness. His confession only confirmed what I already knew: my parents' favoritism had shaped our lives in ways I could no longer ignore. I realized that I couldn't count on them to change or to see my worth. With that clarity, a new kind of focus settled in. I began thinking not just about surviving but about reclaiming my life and dignity. I didn't want revenge in a violent or cruel way, I wanted to win in a way they couldn't dismiss. Every investment I made, every connection I nurtured, and every skill I developed became part of a hidden plan. The more I worked, the more I saw the pieces coming together. It wasn't just about money, it was about power and independence. I pictured a future where I could walk away without looking back, where I would no longer feel small in their eyes. At the same time, a quiet fire of revenge flickered inside me. I didn't want them to suffer immediately, but I wanted them to realize, eventually, that they had underestimated me all along. Every step I took, every secret I kept, was a step closer to that moment. Slowly, carefully, the seeds of my plan for closure, and subtle revenge, were planted, and I knew that the time to act would come when I was ready. The night of the family dinner, I walked into the house feeling a strange mix of calm and determination. My parents had invited everyone, probably thinking it would be another chance to put me down in front of family friends. As usual, they started with their usual remarks, pointing out every small flaw and praising Jake for things that barely mattered. I could feel their eyes on me, expecting me to react, expecting me to shrink under their words. But this time, I didn't. I stayed calm, smiling politely, nodding when needed, all the while taking mental notes. While they talked, I noticed small things that proved what I already suspected: how they gave Jake financial advantages, supported his hobbies, and ignored my own achievements. I quietly observed, storing every detail. Each comment, every gift, every favoritism, became part of the record I was building in my mind. I knew that one day this information would be useful, not for confrontation yet, but to remind me of why I was doing this, for my independence, my dignity, and my future. At the same time, I began subtle maneuvers to change how they saw me. I answered questions with confidence, casually dropped details about projects I was managing, and shared small successes in a way that seemed unimportant but showed competence. I could see them noticing, yet they still underestimated me, assuming I was just boasting without substance. That misjudgment worked in my favor. Jake kept glancing at me nervously, sensing that I was different now. He didn't say much, but I could tell he recognized the shift in me. I wasn't reacting emotionally to their insults. I wasn't seeking approval. I was present, calm, and quietly building leverage they couldn't see. By the end of the evening, I had everything I needed to move forward. Their words and actions had only strengthened my resolve. I left the dinner knowing that I was in control of my own life, and they had no idea what I was planning. The tension was quiet but real. I was ready for the next step, and soon they would see that the child they had always dismissed had been quietly preparing to take charge of his future all along. I sat alone one night, thinking about all the years of insults and harsh words. Every comment my parents had made, every time they called me worthless or compared me to Jake, replayed in my mind. I remembered birthday parties where I got barely a word of praise, school achievements they ignored, and the countless times they made me feel small in front of others. Each memory stung, but instead of breaking me, it started to fuel something stronger, a determination to take control of my life. I thought back to moments from childhood when I had tried to please them and failed. I remembered being scolded for minor mistakes, being laughed at for speaking up, and feeling invisible whenever they celebrated Jake. Those humiliations had shaped me for years, but now I saw them clearly, not as shame, but as lessons that had prepared me to act. I realized that I didn't have to carry their judgment anymore. I also thought about how I wanted my revenge to look. I didn't want violence or cruelty. That would only stoop to their level. Instead, I decided to focus on what hurt them most, their pride and the control they thought they had over me. I would succeed on my own, prove my worth silently but powerfully, and show them that they could no longer define me or limit my life. The idea of reclaiming my dignity in a way they couldn't ignore became my goal. At that moment, Jake approached me, nervous and hesitant. He apologized for his role in the voice note, admitting he had contributed to my pain. I listened, and without bitterness, I forgave him. He was my brother, caught in the same toxic environment, and I didn't want to carry resentment toward him. But my focus remained clear. My energy, my planning, and my determination were all directed at my parents. Their behavior had caused years of pain, and now I was ready to respond in a way that was quiet, smart, and permanent. I felt a sense of calm power settle over me, knowing that the steps I had taken and the plans I was forming would finally allow me to rise above them. This was the turning point, where pain became purpose, and humiliation became the drive to succeed. After years of planning and working quietly, I finally reached the point where I could put my plan into action. I had built financial independence, invested wisely, and grown in my career to a level where I could stand on my own without relying on anyone, not even my family. I also made careful moves to gain control over small family assets that had always been managed without my input. I didn't do this to hurt Jake, he wasn't the target, but it felt satisfying to quietly take steps that showed my parents I was no longer powerless. As my success grew, I started noticing their reactions. At first, they didn't understand. They had expected me to remain the same, to struggle while Jake continued to get praise and attention. But slowly, their disbelief became obvious. I could see it in their eyes when I mentioned achievements or business decisions they hadn't known I was capable of. When I made strategic moves that gave me influence in areas they had assumed I had no part in, they were visibly shocked. Their anger and frustration were clear. They couldn't believe how far I had come without their support or recognition. They tried to belittle me, but it no longer worked. The calm confidence I carried, built over years of silent struggle, made their words meaningless. At the same time, I could see the shame settling in, the realization that they had underestimated me for my entire life. The revenge wasn't loud or aggressive, but it was powerful. I didn't need to fight them or humiliate them, my success alone spoke volumes. Every project I managed, every decision I made, and every investment that grew quietly in the background was proof that I had been capable all along. In those moments, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I had turned all the years of abuse and belittlement into motivation, and my parents were forced to witness it. They had tried to control me, to keep me small, and yet here I was, respected in my field, financially secure, and completely independent. Without shouting or confrontation, I had proven that they had judged me wrongly, and that realization hit them harder than any argument ever could. It was subtle, it was quiet, and it was complete. The day finally came when I had to face my parents one last time. It wasn't about proving anything through words or anger, I had already proven myself through my actions. I walked into the room calmly, carrying the confidence I had built over years of struggle. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, and I didn't beg for their approval. I simply stood there as the person I had worked so hard to become, letting my presence speak for itself. I could see it in their eyes, they had no leverage over me anymore. The familiar expressions of judgment and control were gone, replaced by confusion and disbelief. For the first time, they realized that their words and favoritism had failed to define me. My dignity, patience, and quiet strength shone more than anything I could have said. It was a moment of silent triumph, a confirmation that I had finally escaped the shadow of their cruelty. Jake stood beside me, no longer the unsure younger brother from the past. He had seen my journey, understood my pain, and now supported me fully. There was no tension between us, only mutual respect. He had learned too, and his presence reminded me that family could still exist without judgment or abuse. I left that room knowing I had made a lasting impact. My parents would remember this moment not as a scene of rebellion, but as a quiet statement. Their emotional cruelty had cost them the respect and love they assumed they would always have. They had underestimated me for years, and that misjudgment had finally caught up with them. As I walked away, I felt a sense of closure unlike anything before. The anger and pain I had carried for so long had transformed into strength, independence, and calm satisfaction. I no longer needed their recognition to feel complete. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my future. That day marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I had survived the judgment, the favoritism, and the humiliation, and I emerged not broken, but whole. My parents learned the hard way that their words and actions couldn't hold me back, and I finally knew what it truly meant to be free. Looking back, I realized how far I had come. The betrayal I felt from my parents and the accidental voice note from Jake had cut deep, but it also set me on a path I needed to take. Every insult, every moment of being belittled, had fueled my determination to change my life. Revenge felt satisfying, not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because it proved to myself that I could rise above the cruelty and indifference I had grown up with. The real victory, however, wasn't in proving them wrong, it was in gaining my independence and self-respect. For the first time, I was living life on my terms, free from their judgment and favoritism. I had worked quietly, patiently, and strategically, and the outcome was not only my success but also my peace of mind. I no longer needed anyone's approval to feel worthy. That feeling, more than anything, was priceless. Jake became more than just my brother, he became my confidant and ally. Having someone who understood the family dynamic and shared the experience made the healing process easier for both of us. We could talk openly about our pain, support each other, and learn from the past without resentment. It reminded me that family didn't have to mean control or abuse, it could mean trust and understanding when you chose the right connections. The moral of my journey became clear. True power doesn't come from revenge that destroys, it comes from reclaiming your life, standing tall despite the people who doubted you, and building your future without depending on their approval. Success, dignity, and self-respect are the strongest forms of response to betrayal. Looking back, I felt a mix of emotions, pain from the past, satisfaction from the journey, and hope for the future. The lessons I learned weren't easy, but they were necessary. I knew that anyone who had ever felt belittled, undervalued, or betrayed could relate to my story. In the end, I had proven to myself, and quietly to my parents, that I was capable, strong, and independent. The pain of betrayal had been transformed into growth, and the quiet, deliberate steps I had taken brought me not just success, but freedom. That was the ultimate lesson: reclaiming your life is the most powerful revenge of all.